held its annual general meeting, where around 300 members attended. Items on the agenda included the best-of-breed health checks and the latest on moving the KC forward as a company limited by guarantee. Now, I'm joined by Kennel Club Chairman Steve Dean. First of all, Steve, only around 25% of your members turned up at this annual general meeting. Is this an average turnout?
I would say it's an exceptional turnout for just about any organisation to get 25% of its members there. The straight answer to your question is yes, it's probably actually a few more than we normally would expect. And that's why we used a venue that could seat up to 400.
There was quite some hot topics on the agenda, obviously, but does the AGM allow enough time for major issues to be fully debated by members? Because many were committed to get trains home. I know the timings of things, it started slightly later than usual.
No, it all starts at 11:15. That gives members chance to make the best of any cheap day returns to get into London. And in actual fact, we gave them plenty of notice that with the length of the agenda it was likely to go on well into the afternoon, and indeed it finished a little bit before 5 o'clock. I think there's plenty of time there, yes.
Might it be better at a more accessible venue perhaps, somewhere more central in the country?
Well, I guess you're thinking of Stoneleigh, and the simple answer is that we have in the past canvassed members' views on holding meetings at Stoneleigh. For example, we offered to hold the SGM at Stoneleigh, but there is no strong desire on the members' part to go to Stoneleigh or other venues. We can at least host the meeting properly here in London, around Clarges Street, so that we can find decent sized venues. It's quite hard to find somewhere that can sit 300-400 people in reasonable comfort and also at a reasonable cost.
But do you think if you gave more time to the day, and perhaps if you brought the timings earlier, say to a 10 o'clock, maybe even a 9:30 start, that you would have more time to debate the topics on the agenda more fully?
Well, I don't think there was any evidence from this meeting, which was a particularly full meeting, that there was any lack of time. My sense was the debates had finished, and although we ran close to our limit of 5 o'clock, people seemed to have had plenty of time to say what they wished. I don't think lengthening the meeting would necessarily add to that, but that's really for members to say. If they wish to start earlier or have the meeting in another place, that's fine. But there are pros and cons. If you move the meeting earlier, there are people who come from far afield that would have to maybe stay overnight that wouldn't normally. It's the dilemma we all have when you hold a meeting.
Is it something you would consider then in future, and if your members brought it up?
Of course. I mean, if there was a wish on the members' behalf to change the format of the AGM, we can take a look at that in General Committee and decide how best to do it. To date, history shows, and I would argue this last AGM showed, that there was adequate time to hold the meeting between 11:15 and 5 o'clock.
Is it quite normal for many members to actually leave after lunchtime as well, because there seemed to be almost like a 50% sort of people have left by afternoon, when perhaps more of the hot topics came onto the agenda?
I think it was more like a third had probably gone over the period of the afternoon, and it's not unusual that when a meeting goes into the afternoon that a number of members move on and either go home or have other appointments. And I would argue that's fairly typical of many AGMs.
So, do you feel that the vote on veterinary checks issue reflected the views of dog people in general, and those in the 15 breeds in particular?
Well, it certainly reflected the views of the members present, and as far as I'm concerned, I believe the discussion did seem to cover most of the topics that have been raised both in the press and in conversations with various people around dog shows.
So obviously this was a meeting that the health checks obviously has become quite a hot topic amongst dog showing fraternity. Mm-hmm. And this was probably one special meeting, I suppose, where lots of people had things to say, and possibly more so than they would in previous annual general meetings. Is that fair to say?
No, I don't necessarily agree with that. There was plenty to say, of course, and I think people very fairly reflected, as I said, the discussions that have been going on both in the press and around the dog shows. But I wouldn't say that it's unusual for there to be quite a bit of debate on various topics at the AGM. It obviously depends. I mean, we had a SGM to discuss the Incorporation, where there was a considerable amount of debate, as you would expect and you would hope. So I don't think it was exceptional.
But for 300 members to vote on such a hot topic out of around 1,200 members doesn't reflect possibly the views of the public in terms of dog showing in general.
Well, as I said, my view was, listening to the debate, all the points were covered that have been covered before. There are a number of valid points made. I didn't see that there was anything new or anything particularly missed out. All the valid topics were there. The simple fact is the discussion ranged across a number of issues. The one good thing is that it seems, and this is true from your own journal as well as the competitor, it's pretty clear everyone agrees that some form of veterinary health check is a good idea. The debate is all about how that should be done, and there are people who actually agree with health checking best of breeds. My postbox is probably slightly in favour of agreeing with the veterinary health checks rather than disagreeing, but then that may be expected. Perhaps other people's postboxes show the reverse, but it does demonstrate that there is a strength of support for health checking across the piece. Other people feel that maybe we should be health checking every dog as it comes into the showground. I believe at the meeting, someone from one of the big shows pointed out that logistically that would be very difficult to achieve. There is a move, or at least an opinion, that we should be getting people to have health certificates done, maybe once, twice a year. But of course the point was then made that they can only be valid at the time of a veterinary check. You can't be certain that a dog that is in good health on January the 1st is still in good health on December the 31st. So, there are a lot of pros and cons about this, and the debate really is how we make sure that we maintain health. I think it's also important that we make sure we don't confuse what we mean by health, because there have been people who've brought in issues, for example, of hip scores and elbow scores into the frame. And we have other ways of dealing with health conditions that are inherited through health tests. The whole business of health checking dogs going into the show ring is about health checking in relation to areas of exaggeration. And that's why we ended up with the 15 breeds, because certainly 14 of them were considered as being breeds that were typically criticised for exaggerated conformation related to health.
We actually spoke pre-Crufts very briefly about the health checks and the impending health checks as it was then. Have you been quite surprised at the reaction since the health checks were introduced at Crufts and at subsequent shows?
I think if anything, I have not been necessarily surprised, because obviously if any dog fails, you expect a reaction to that. I think I've been a little bit disappointed in the fact that many people don't seem to have understood exactly what health checks were about. And as we'd spent over a year talking to the breed clubs and to the judges and also to the show societies, I had hoped that would have filtered out a little bit more to the wider dog showing community. It appears that hasn't been the case. When we've discussed it with the high profile breeds, and indeed I've personally had meetings with the high profile breeds since Crufts, I don't think there were that many surprises for them that we were discussing the same issues about high profile breeds, which is particularly how to get off the high profile breed list. But much of the reaction, the negative reaction from people outside of those breeds has been a total misunderstanding of what the best of breed check is about. And that was disappointing.
At Crufts, 6 of the 15 dogs failed. At shows since Crufts, just 2 of something like 50 have failed. How do you account for this sort of quite remarkable anomaly?
Well, firstly, I think it's about 50 overall that have been checked, and including Crufts. I believe, in addition to the figures that you've quoted, we've also got about 5 breeds where the show, the best of breed winners, chose not to compete and therefore didn't go to the vet. So we don't know how they affected the figures. We don't know whether they'd have passed or failed. the ratio, which is obviously what you're referring to, between Crufts and other shows, is an interesting one. Some factors are because some of those shows are specific group shows, and therefore, depending on the distribution of the high-profile breeds and which ones are the higher risk than the other ones, will depend how the numbers have panned out. But inevitably, after Crufts, I've no doubt that the veterinary surgeons learned a great deal. I've no doubt that dog exhibitors learned a great deal. I've also pretty certain that judges are being particularly careful about which dogs they put forward. And so there's been something of a learning curve. And I suspect that's also influenced which dogs were being taken to shows, which dogs were being put up. And actually, I regard it as entirely good news, because what we have is a high proportion of these dogs going through into the group. And that is the intent of the high profile breed, best of breed veterinary check, is to confirm that dogs going forward into the group are in good health, and therefore help those breeds justify that they are using the show ring as a showcase for health. And I think that's to be applauded. And from the outset, I've said that the high profile breeds have made huge strides forward. We have to make sure that what goes forward into the group demonstrates the point. And the good news is, I think the figures are showing us that it is helping a great deal to make that point.
And you mentioned in your answer there about how some owners of best of breeds at the championship shows chose not to compete for the best of breed. When you first heard that the first person did that, or the first owner did that, how did that make you feel?
I'm very disappointed for the breed. I felt very disappointed for the breed, because the whole purpose of, as I've said, of these best of breed checks is to prove that the dogs going forward are healthy. And unfortunately, by not competing, they've reduced the opportunity for the breed to establish evidence to show that the dogs going through are healthy. So it's a very disappointing for the breed. From the Kennel Club's perspective, if they don't challenge for best of breed and therefore don't get looked at by the veterinary surgeon, it doesn't really help us very much to defend the breed to the outside world. So overall, I think it was a somewhat pointless exercise by those, although I respect that, you know, people had high feelings about this, but that sort of demonstration, I'm afraid, I don't think really is to the benefit of the breed.
Some do find it possibly a little bit hypocritical that the KC insists on veterinary checks on some top show dogs, but is quite prepared to give the accolade of registration to dogs whose breeders don't do any of the required health tests for the breed. Is a two-tier registration system, which was mentioned at the AGM, is this some way of going to dealing with this, or towards dealing with this?
The debate at the AGM on two-tier registration system was quite an interesting one, because clearly we need to make sure that our registration system is fit for purpose for the future. The concept at the AGM, I think, was slightly different to what your question poses, but it was broadly the same in that it suggested that the registration system should in some way recognise people who are doing all the right things to breed dogs. From the General Committee's point of view, of course, the Assured Breeder Scheme would be what we would point to as achieving that. The concept, though, of a two-tier registrations issue will be taken back to the General Committee and debated in full, because we now have a consultation going on from DEFRA on bringing in dog registration in relation, in fact, to dangerous dogs. But nevertheless, registration is being proposed as part of that. And if that goes forward, we're going to need to make sure our registration system sits either alongside or within that registration system in a comfortable way as well. Personally, I have no great objection to some form of tiered registration, but the point was made at the meeting that we need to be very careful not to turn the registration of pedigree dogs into a sort of boutique type system where only certain dogs are allowed in. The whole concept of registration is that it's done on the Somerset House principle. In other words, you register everything, but the idea is that you select the healthiest stock and the best that typifies each breed to breed from. And that's the job of the breeder, and it's the job of the judge in the ring to make sure they reward those dogs. How we identify them, of course, is the issue, but we already do quite a bit of that. For example, Health Test Finder allows people to look up health tests. The assured breeder scheme identifies breeders that are signed up to the principles, which includes various health tests. I think it'd be quite interesting to see where the General Committee end up on that, but adapting the registration system so that it is fit for purpose and does actually identify some of the best dogs is a good idea. You used the word accolade. I think we need to be careful of applying that. That's a term we use a lot in the assured breeder scheme. I think the registration of a dog has benefit in the fact that it has a pedigree, and the pedigree therefore identifies its ancestry, and through that, with reference to health testing, we can identify where problems have arisen and where they've passed through generations of dogs. So being a registered pedigree dog has a benefit, but it is a benefit that allows us collectively, that's not just the Kennel Club but breeders, to track inherited diseases and to look at quality of dogs down through lines. And that's the benefit. Whether you should call it an accolade, I think is questionable, but there is distinct benefit to registering a dog, and I think we should encourage people to register all pedigree dogs. How we then differentiate them is an interesting question that will be picked up by the General Committee.
So just going back to the best of breed health checks again, the vets who have done the checks have, according to some reports from exhibitors involved, have varied considerably in the approach and the detail of the examination. Are they to be requested to take a more consistent approach? Is this going to be something as part of the review? And have you yourself, obviously as a vet, have you taken the time to approach them or actually speak to some of these vets that are involved?
Well, let's deal with the last first. Because I was the senior vet on the General Committee when health testing was first mooted, I helped put together the whole scheme, and indeed piloted it at Crufts for several years before we introduced it this last year as a compulsory inspection or check. As a result, therefore, I have spoken to each veterinary surgeon that is officiating at a show, and I think there's about 2 later shows in the year I still need to catch. But last year we had 2 meetings for vets to attend, to be briefed, and I was part of that briefing. There are some vets that live, let's say, in more geographically remote areas, and typically I'm thinking of Wales and Scotland, where I've taken the trouble to go to them and sit down and brief them. I believe that I have one to do in Northern Ireland, which again you can understand why a veterinary surgeon doesn't necessarily want to take a whole day to be briefed how to do this. So inevitably I will go to Northern Ireland to speak to that veterinary surgeon. So yes, I've spoken to all of them, yes, I've briefed them, and actually the briefing hasn't changed that much from last year to now. Yes, there have been reports that the vet checks have been a little variable. Interesting enough, I've spoken to quite a few of the vets after the shows, and I have to say that their accounts and the accounts of the stewards that accompanied people to the vet room don't always tie up with the accounts that we've read in the press. I think we should remember these are veterinary surgeons, and what they're doing is a very superficial check in terms of a veterinary examination. I personally don't believe that any veterinary surgeon seeks to cause an animal distress or pain when they're examining it. And I'm very confident that in this case, despite the reports of huge variation in the way vets have gone over dogs, I believe vets will have done it in a sensible and professional manner.
So as part of this review that we know has been undertaken on the health checks, what sort of areas are you going to be looking at? Have you already specified these yet? And how long will it be until you start working on these, or is it an ongoing process already?
Well, the first thing is that we realised after Crufts that we had written the guidance for the veterinary surgeon largely in vet speak. So what we've done is set about trying to turn that into a form of words that the dog exhibitor can understand, as well as the judge, so that it's absolutely transparent what the veterinary surgeon is being asked to look for. That currently is just coming close to ending its redrafting and is likely to go to the high-profile breeds first, so they can see it to be comfortable.
The breed clubs?
The breed clubs,
right,
yes. And then we will, once we have their agreement and understanding of what it says, and I don't actually believe there'll be any surprises in there for them, but once we have that, it will then be put on wider distribution. Of course, the veterinary check leaflet was always available on our website, but you know, we will make sure we'll learn from what happened leading up to Crufts and make sure the wider show community had seen it as well. So that's well advanced. We realised after Crufts that there was a massive gap between the way veterinary surgeons were looking at the health of eyes and the way that the judges and the exhibitors were looking at the health of eyes. And we've got him trained some plans to put together a seminar to bring the vets and the exhibitors and judges together to talk about canine eye health. In other words, an appreciation of how to recognise pain and discomfort related particularly to the conformation of eyelids. You know, we've focused in the veterinary profession on eye examinations, but it's the globe of the eye that we've been interested in most. And although on the form it does have a section for filling out information on things like eyelids and tear production and so on, the adnexa, as vets call it, that's not been particularly taken note of or used a great deal. There is a big move on the veterinary side to make sure that part is filled in accurately. And I think that's an area perhaps where both sides are at fault in that we have failed to pay sufficient attention to the relatively low-grade discomfort that can occur, although in some cases it can be massive discomfort, that relates to poor eyelid conformation. And having said what I said, I believe that the top winning show dogs are at the better end of eyelid conformation, much better end. And in fact, some breeds have made huge steps forward in that area. But I think we have to recognise that in some breeds there's still a little way to go before we can be completely happy. I think also that the breeds that had the most seriously affected eyelid conformation have probably taken a large number of those dogs out of the breeding programme or out of the ring. But I think we have to recognise that you can't improve a breed's eyelid conformation in just 1 or 2 generations, although I have to say I'm astonished at the progress some of them have made quite quickly.
You mentioned judges in there and bringing judges and sort of the vets more in line into
Yes.
terms of the conformation.
Yes.
Now, I'm a prospective judge.
Mm-hmm.
You know, in years to come, I may start judging some of these high-profile breeds. It does scare you to think, you know, what should you be looking for, that sort of thing. So you're saying that maybe a seminar might be able to help me?
Well, it'll be a first step. The strange thing is that judges can quite happily look at dogs and be reasonably confident of spotting a lame dog. It would appear that the vast majority are more than happy to judge in terms of skin problems. And then we've got dogs with respiratory problems that we're looking for. And by and large, they seem to have been able to judge keeping that in mind. It does seem that looking at the canine eye scares some judges, or at least we have put some judges in a position where they're uncertain as to what they're looking for. And that is the bit that we've got to get right. And we've got to come to a common agreement. I'm not saying the veterinary surgeons have got it absolutely right, but we have to come to a common agreement. So judges, exhibitors, breeders and veterinary surgeons all have a common aim, because what we're all interested in at the end of the day is healthy dogs. And I particularly want to see dogs walking around that I'm fairly confident don't walk around all day with sore eyes. I'm no doubt you've had grit in your eye at some stage, I certainly have, and even though it might only be there for a few hours or half a day, it's pretty upsetting. And I think that if we've got dogs that are walking around with that sort of level of discomfort, I am absolutely certain dog people will want to see that changed.
So since Crufts, a lot of frustration sort of developed in the dog showing world at the way the health checks were implemented. I think it possibly shocked people into realising this is a reality and this is what's going to happen. Shortly after Crufts, the Canine Alliance was formed. It's got more than 1,800 members at the moment and counting. People have paid to become members of the CA. Do you have a message to these people, and are you ever likely to meet some of these people to understand where they're coming from?
I don't have any particular message for any particular group of people. I think the message is the same across the piece. We all seem to agree that we want our dogs to be healthy. What we need to do is to work together and make sure that we achieve that. If the introduction of these best of breed health checks has come as a shock, I would urge people to make sure that in the aftermath of that shock, that they make sure that they fully understand why they're being done and how they fit in to the overall objective on health, because these checks are just one aspect. They're an aspect to make sure that the show ring is the proper showcase for the healthy stock that we wish to put forward. Behind that, there is a whole raft of activity going on at breed level where many breeds, not just high profile breeds, but many breeds have realised they've got health issues, be they inherited in terms of an inherited disease or inherited in terms of a exaggerated conformation. And these breeds are working very, very hard. And what we've got to do is make sure that the stock that comes through and gets shown is the very best, not only of the breed in terms of breed type, but also of the breed in terms of health type. And my message to everyone is, can we stop bickering and actually get together and make sure that we are moving health forwards? Personally, I think we are. And I think this best of breeds issue, a health check issue, is almost something of a distraction. Understand it's caused upset, understand it's caused quite a bit of anger, but I think it's mainly through misunderstanding. And we're listening. We have tried to clarify the health checking that's going on. You've heard our plans in the immediate future for dealing with it. But the real issue here is to make sure that we deal with the whole issue of canine health, because out there we've got the Associate Parliamentary Group on Animal Welfare, who are keeping a very strong eye on what pedigree dogs are doing. We've got the advisory group on the welfare issues of dog breeding, also busy working away, putting ideas together. And we need to stand together and make sure we're ready to counter that, because I'm sure we all agree that most of the health problems don't come from the core of the breeds that exhibit and show their dogs. But we have to make sure we can prove that we're in good order, and then we can take the battle to the people who are the real problem, which are the puppy farmers. And it's only by working together we'll do that. And at the moment, I think we're distracting ourselves and putting energy into the wrong area. I think we should be putting our energy into making sure that we deal with the indiscriminate breeder, who is a much, much bigger problem in this.
On this year's More For coverage, obviously mentions of the health checks was kept to a minimum. It was very brief. Possibly the audience might not have actually quite caught on what was going on. If you weren't in the dog world and you're a member of the public, it wasn't really explained that thoroughly. Assuming that a TV company will be involved in Crufts 2013, will this aspect of Crufts, the best of breed health checks, get more airtime? And if so, will it be more thoroughly thought through perhaps?
Okay. One of the consequences of having a television company televising Crufts, and particularly when that television company has taken over the whole process, in other words, they're funding that televising of Crufts, we don't have editorial control over what goes out. We discuss it with More For, and by the way, they discuss the content with other parties as well, not just with us, but with other organisations, including the profession and also some of the charities. So they are interested in what everyone wants to see there, but they are responsible for what actually goes out. The vet checks were covered. They were covered, I believe, on the first night. Certainly I did a little bit of filming with the TV crew to just quickly demonstrate what was going to happen on vet checks. And I think that coverage was quite reasonable. Whether next year we would obviously be saying that we would like to continue that theme in some shape or form during the coverage, if nothing else to highlight the fantastic progress that we hope will have been made by then. And it would be rather good if by then maybe one or two breeds have made progress to coming off high profile breeds, so we can actually show that the whole dog show world is working towards solving some of the major criticisms that come its way. So I think we have to be realistic here. Whatever coverage we get we will pitch for. But it is at the end of the day the television programme makers' agenda. They decide the content.
Do you think that is realistic then, that one of the high profile breeds could no longer be in that category by next Crufts?
Well, I think it's quite possible for one to come off before next Crufts. Whether we can make enough progress to get any others off by then, I think, is questionable. Only because it's not a great deal of time to go between now and the next Crufts. Having said that, we're working with some of the high-profile breeds already to talk about what sort of data they need, what sort of information they need to justify why they should come off the list. And as far as I can see, quite a few of them have very good ideas in mind. We have some work to do in that area because each breed has its unique situation, so we have to tailor the sort of information we're looking for according to the breed. But for example, the number of best of breeds that get through the veterinary check will be one of the factors that will obviously count towards a justification for coming off the list.
And that one breed might be?
To be honest, I think it's probably the Chinese crested, which is the easiest one. We put them on because of the concerns about skin damage due to either rather overzealous use of the shaver or of chemical hair removers. I think the breed have done a good job. They've all passed up to now. I think they've got the message and they're being more careful, which is absolutely fantastic. And clearly they're the obvious breed that should be coming to us at some stage to say, look, have we done enough? The way we've discussed it with the high profile breeds is that when a breed comes off, it would probably come off the list and be on a probation period for a while. So it would be still someone, as it were, keeping an eye on them, but maybe not needing to go through the veterinary checks and so on. But that's all to the good in my view.
And talking of Crufts, one thing that we felt that was noticeable this year, particularly in the stands surrounding the main arena, on the group judging of each night, not really talking best in show because it's slightly different because there's obviously lots of activities leading up to best in show that you put in. But the group judging, the number of spectators seemed quite sparse this year. Certainly the arena wasn't well filled. Have you got any figures to show perhaps that, you know, this year it was sort of slightly less on previous years? Or?
We don't keep figures for who comes because we don't sell tickets for the first 3 nights. We only have figures for the last night. I can tell you for the last night we only had about 300-400 tickets left. So I think we could seat a little over 4,000. So it was pretty much a full house, as you sort of suggested. I noticed on the Thursday night that it was a bit thin, but I have to say it's a bit thin most Thursdays. Friday and Saturday I thought were much better, but I think we need to remember that if you just take the figures that we have for the last evening, our highest I think was over 600, which is about the time the BBC decided to stop covering Crufts. And I think it's taken a few years for people to find it on Channel More 4. And I think also people are now beginning to realise that we stream a lot of Crufts and that they can pick therefore quite a bit of it up online. And I think all that affects the number of people who stay. And there is also an effect of which groups are on which day, because that also has an effect as to how many people will stay. So there's a lot of balancing factors. I wasn't that disappointed, and remember we were up on our gate this year. So we're very delighted with the number of people who came to Crufts. I think all the work that the breeds and ourselves have been doing to promote the pedigree dog and its place in society has worked. There's a lot of families come to Crufts to see dogs, and I think the numbers are fine. When it comes to the main ring, there's a lot of factors why people stay or don't stay, and I remember from my days showing that by the time you've been there from something like 7:30 in the morning, by the time you get to the best in show in the evening, you almost quite like to get home and watch it sat with a gin and tonic or a beer in your hand. I think that's sad because I think it is a great event, and you mentioned that on the final evening there's a lot of other events going on. Actually, there's a lot of other events going on leading up to the groups every evening. So anyone watching this on your Dog World TV, I'd just say each evening, except the last evening, is free. So come down and watch it, because it is a fantastic spectacle. And I hope everyone liked the new ring layout with our rather nice star banner at the back. I thought that was rather good.
I did like that too, actually.
Excellent. One satisfied customer.
Now, moving slightly away from crufts, another thing that was discussed at the AGM was the new company limited by guarantee status. Yes. What sort of significant benefits will this have?
Well, I think firstly, we're bringing the Kennel Club into the modern world in this sense, because a lot of clubs in London have moved to company limited by guarantee status, Incorporation as it's otherwise known. And this means the biggest issue is that it means that the directors of the new company, which are the General Committee, have a limited liability. So that means there should be no barrier for anyone out there serving on General Committee, because they're concerned about some liability that they could have if something went wrong with the Kennel Club, which I hasten to add, nothing is going to go wrong as in my time at least, and it's in very good state. But let's just look at some other things. The first thing is it brings in proxy voting. Now, proxy voting goes one step beyond postal voting. You'll be aware we've allowed postal voting for some years on the membership of the General Committee voting, but proxy voting will allow someone to actually vote on all of the items on the agenda that require a vote, which is, I think, a major step forward. You mentioned earlier about the number of people turning up. Some people just physically can't get here, but they will be able to influence the meeting through proxy voting. I think the other thing is that it will carry forward some concepts that I know General Committee have been interested in, which is that we have more consultation on issues. And actually the very consultation we had on Incorporation, I think, demonstrates how these things should work, in that we went to the members with the concept, we then developed the articles and the rules, we let the members see a draft, we had meetings, people were allowed to give us information and comment in, we readjusted the draft, and by the time we got to the AGM, the draft was so advanced that there were very, very few questions, and it went through quite easily. And actually that's how AGM should run. It shouldn't be that they should be there all day debating. We should have had the debate by the time things go to the AGM. So the AGM is about tidying up some loose ends and then voting on the issue. So I think transparency is a big thing. Of course, being a company limited by guarantee, you have to put accounts into Companies House, so that will give us more public transparency. And I think it will also, to some extent, mean that members of General Committee will be fully valued, because they will become directors of this company and therefore will have, in fact, no different responsibility to what they had before, but it becomes a little bit more acutely obvious.
Now, the KC recently introduced restriction about how many Cesarean operations a bitch may have. Why was it felt necessary to make public in the records supplements if a litter was born by Cesarean?
Well, I think the simple fact is that in the same way that we record other health information on the registration database, it seems perfectly reasonable for people who are purchasing a puppy to know whether that puppy has been born by Cesarean. The whole concept is that we want to limit the number of Cesarean sections, and it seems perfectly reasonable to me not to hide that under a bush. We should be out there telling people, firstly, that we're recording it, and secondly, that these pups were born by Cesarean. That was a decision by General Committee when it first went through, and it seems perfectly reasonable to me to do that. And we certainly haven't had anyone come back and complain so far.
So no feedback really on that one?
No.
And just finally, at a time when I suppose many big dog people are feeling, in their words, depressed about the support. There's not the same sort of hype as there was, 5-10 years ago perhaps. Does the KC have any plans to encourage new people into dogs and to retain the interest of those already in it?
Well, let's deal with the first thing first, and that is that I've been around for more than 30 years around dog shows and dog sport, and ever since I joined this world, I can tell you that there's been depression about what's going on in various guises. The Kennel Club, of course, sits behind all of dog events, and in particular sets the regulations and the structure for those events. in actual fact, much of the encouragement for people to join in would come from breed clubs, from people who breed, from dog shows themselves, to make themselves attractive to people and make them wish to compete. The Kennel Club does its bit by, for example, or through the Young Kennel Club, where we have put a lot of effort into training young people, both in terms of understanding dogs and judging dogs, and also the Young Kennel Club does fantastic work training people at various events around the country. You know that yourself. So we set up the structure for that, and that's a good example of how the Kennel Club gives a structure, but it's the people, it's the Young Kennel Club who actually do all the work. I've been delighted to help them this year. I've taken dogs to various events, I've spoken at events on conformation and movement, and that's, if you like, a contribution back in. But that's only what we should all be doing. The Kennel Club can't do this alone, and we have to work with the shows, the societies and the clubs to actually make dog showing attractive to the public. But I would also say that it's not just dog shows. We cover a broad remit, so all of the activities are under our umbrella, and certainly we know that agility is extremely popular at the moment. A lot of the public like companion dog shows, which is another area, which is just slightly less maybe tense for them, more relaxed to compete with their dog. I'm sure Ashley and Pudsey will have increased the number of people who are rushing off to do heel work to music. And that's great. That's the sort of thing that we want. Although sometimes big press coverage like that needs to be managed carefully, because it can have the wrong effect if you're not careful about it. Having said all that, we need good news. And I don't think people should be so depressed. We're in a tough time. Money's tight. Life's pretty difficult. Actually, dog shows are a great way to get out there and enjoy a little bit of fun. And okay, maybe we're going to see a reduced entry because people can't travel so far, but we shouldn't be so depressed. We are now increasingly showing the world that pedigree dog people are breeding healthy stock, and people want pedigree dogs. The number of hits we get on our website for pedigree dogs and rescue pedigree dogs is enormous. So people want pedigree dogs. Why are we so depressed? Let's get out there and enjoy them.
Well, Steve Dean, Chairman of the Kennel Club, thank you very much for spending some time with us today.
No, you're very welcome. Thanks for coming.